Hello and welcome to our presentation about the Civil War. We're going to take some notes on the Dred Scott case, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and the election of 1860 leading up to the war. So we're going to begin with the Dred Scott versus Sandford case, which began in 1857, well technically 1846 when he first sued. So here's some background about him. We have Dred Scott, who is a slave, and he is taken from slave states to free states back to slave states. And what's unique about this case is it really addresses head-on the issue of slavery and has a branch who really hasn't looked at this issue kind of make their decision head-on. And so with the case, we have Minnesota is a free state because according to the Missouri Compromise of 1820, Minnesota is free, whereas Missouri is slave. It had that magic border, which we'll talk about next. And so in 1846, Dred Scott decides to sue for his slavery. And so we're going to watch a little video and take notes while you watch the video.
In 1857, while the reformers worked to improve American society, James Buchanan, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, took the oath of office as America's 15th president. Only 2 days after President Buchanan was inaugurated, Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney issued a series of rulings called the Dred Scott decision that would come to have a tremendous impact on the future of the United States. Dred Scott was a slave from Missouri. He had filed a lawsuit asking the court to grant him his freedom on the grounds that many years earlier his owner had taken him to live for an extended period in a territory where slavery was illegal under the Missouri Compromise. This was the 1820 law, repealed in 1854, that had permitted slavery in Missouri as long as it was outlawed in territories north of what was called the Missouri Compromise line. When they issued the Dred Scott decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Missouri Compromise had been unconstitutional because it had illegally deprived slave owners of their right to own a certain kind of property, that is, their slaves, in the northern territories. In other words, the court said that Dred Scott had based his case on an unconstitutional law, and thus it had no merit. In addition, the Supreme Court went on to repeal laws that restricted the rights of American citizens to own slaves in the new U.S. territories, such as Kansas and Nebraska. Furthermore, the court ruled that blacks, even if they weren't slaves, were not allowed to be U.S. citizens. Therefore, they said, Dred Scott should never have been allowed to file a lawsuit in the first place. President Buchanan supported the decision in the Dred Scott case, and it was hailed as a great victory for the pro-slavery forces of the South. But Northerners reacted to it angrily.
So I want you to pay attention after this to how did the Northerners as well as the Southerners react. So we have Chief Justice Roger Taney making his decision on several grounds. One, that slaves are excluded from citizenship, so they have no right even to be suing for themselves because they are not citizens. They are almost like 3/5 of a citizen, but unfortunately they don't get 3/5 of the rights. Also, the second component of it is that Congress had no right to prohibit slavery and to stop it because it violates the Fifth Amendment, which is the right to own property. And slaves are seen as property. They are not seen as people. So make sure to take notes now on how the North and the South reacts.
Calling it a wicked and false judgment. And the Republican Party said that the Dred Scott decision clearly showed that slave owners were plotting to use the Constitution to achieve their goal of expanding slavery in the United States.
So in 1858, we have the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They were both debating to be the senator of Illinois. And they traveled around Illinois making all these debates about key issues, slavery, free soil, etc. And so what's interesting about this is we have the election of 1860 really being the key decider in the slavery issue. And we have these debates in 1858 kind of determining what's going to happen with this. How are we going to discuss these issues? What are people's stances? What are their views? And so we're going to look at some quotes coming up. But first, let's get a sense of who was Lincoln and who was Douglas. Now, Lincoln was a famous lawyer in Illinois. He wasn't the most successful person. He lost many of his elections. The presidency, obviously, he didn't lose. He opposed slavery in new territories. However, he supported the fact that there was slavery in the current territories. So he mainly wanted to stop it in new territories. He also thought that the federal government should be more powerful than the state governments. This sounds very familiar to what Jefferson and Adams were arguing about. Whereas Adams thought that the federal government should be more powerful, and Jefferson thought that it should not be powerful. And next we have Stephen Douglas. And he was known as the Little Giant, partially because of his short stature and his fiery spirit. He was a Democrat, and Lincoln eventually founding the Republicans, and he supported popular sovereignty, the idea that states and the people within those states have the right to make their own decisions about slavery. The most famous example of this is the Kansas-Nebraska Act, in which Kansas and Nebraska were able to decide if they wanted to be a free or slave state. And he, of course, sponsored this act and supported it heavily. So now we're going to look at some quotes between Lincoln and Douglas. So as I read the quote, please decide who said it. So it is the true intent and meaning of this act, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, not to legislate slavery into any state or territory, or to exclude it therefrom, but to leave the people thereof perfectly free to regulate their domestic institutions in their own way. And this is Stephen Douglas. Okay, so next quote. For one, I am opposed to Negro citizenship in every form. Okay, this person does not want African Americans to have citizenship. Who will this be? Stephen Douglas. Next quote. I hate it because of the monstrous injustices of slavery itself. I have no prejudice against the Southern people. So this person is saying they hate slavery, but not the people involved in it. And this is Abraham Lincoln. Okay, next. I'm in favor of the race to which I belong, having the superior position. I have never said anything to the contrary. But I hold that there is no reason why the Negro is not entitled to all the natural rights enumerated in the Declaration of Independence. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So basically this person is saying, we are the superior race. However, the Declaration of Independence didn't talk about race. It just said that all men. And so this is Abraham Lincoln. And now what I find interesting about this one is that the idea of we are the superior race. We are more important than you. But also allowing for other people to be part of the American democracy system. But I do say that, as I understand the Dred Scott decision, if any one man wants slaves, all the rest have no way of keeping that one man from holding them. Meaning that if someone wants slaves, they're going to figure out how to get them. And this is Abraham Lincoln. Next one. This government was made upon the great basis of the sovereignty, which was mentioned earlier, of the states, the right of each state, and every other question. So who supported sovereignty of some form? That was Stephen Douglas, who supported popular sovereignty as known as in the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay, last two. I hold that the signers of the Declaration of Independence had no reference to Negroes at all when they declared all men to be created equal. They alluded to white men and none others. So this person is basically saying that the reference to men does not include Negro people, otherwise known as African Americans. And this person is going to be Stephen Douglas. Okay, next one. There never had been a man in the world who had said that the Declaration of Independence did not include Negroes in the term all men. So kind of a different view of the Declaration of Independence. And this is Abraham Lincoln. Good job, you guys. So let's see what's coming up next. So I would like you to review back and look at those quotes, look at what you chose, and summarize the views of Lincoln and Douglas on slavery. After you've done that, I would like you to match each phrase into USA or C.S.A. USA meaning the United States of America, the Union, and C.S.A. the Confederate States of America, the Confederates, which is the South. And so I would like you to match the phrases where they belong, and when we review it next class, you will get candy if you did it correctly. So good luck, and I will see you tomorrow.